Hey guys, tonight we wonder, have you ever stared into a night sky so wide and dark that it made your thoughts feel small but strangely important? Maybe you've done it without realizing, standing on a balcony, brushing your teeth, noticing a single bright star and thinking, is something looking back? Not a god, not aliens, not even other people, just the universe. The whole thing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've probably heard people ask big questions before. Where did everything come from? What happens after we die? But somewhere on the edge of all that is a quieter, stranger question. Is the universe conscious? Not in a sci-fi way, with eyes or a brain or a voice, but in some subtle, unnameable way. Is it aware? Does it feel? Could everything you've ever touched or walked on or breathed actually carry a sliver of mind, even if that mind is dim, scattered, or sleeping? It's a ridiculous question, right? But not too ridiculous. Not ridiculous enough to stop philosophers, physicists, and poets from asking it across centuries. Not ridiculous enough to keep scientists from drawing equations on whiteboards while secretly wondering what it means to experience anything at all. Maybe consciousness is just something that happens when neurons wire up a certain way. Or maybe, and this is the strange part, maybe it's baked into reality itself. Maybe it's everywhere, like gravity. Faint in most places, bright in others, impossible to hold, but there. It doesn't take much to start slipping down that slope. You think of your own mind, of how your body somehow grew a sense of you, and then you imagine everything else, stars, rocks, oceans. Maybe they didn't miss that bus entirely. Maybe they're on the same track, just slower, or quieter, or tangled in different forms. There's this old thought experiment where someone imagines what it would be like to be a bat. You can study its body, its habits, the way it flies, but you'll never know what it feels like to be that bat. That's the line between science and consciousness, between seeing and experiencing. Now imagine trying that with the universe. You could study galaxies forever, and still never know what it's like to be one. But what if the galaxy does know? What if it feels in some way we can't measure? There's a word for this kind of idea, panpsychism. It means simply that mind might be a fundamental part of the universe, like mass or time. Not something created by evolution or chance, but something already here, scattered like dust across everything. Of course, most scientists don't take this idea very seriously, not in a professional sense, but late at night, even they wonder, because there are moments, odd, fragile moments, when physics almost seems to nudge toward poetry, when particles seem to behave differently depending on whether you're watching, when consciousness feels less like a side effect of the brain and more like a fabric. You lie there, thinking about that. The way a wave collapses when it's observed, the way time seems to move forward only when there's a mind to track it, the way your dog stares at you like it knows something you don't. And what about your own body? You didn't ask to be conscious. You didn't build your own awareness like a model kit. It just showed up one day, like light through a window. And now you're here, thinking, feeling, wondering, about a universe that might be doing the same. It's a little like dreaming. You're in a world, but the world is in you. You talk to people, but they're made of thought. You fear things, chase things, fall in love with things, all invented by the same brain that's afraid, chasing, loving. A loop. Now imagine if this whole universe is dreaming too, and maybe, just maybe, you are one of its dreams. That's a soft thought, not a theory, not even a belief, just something to cradle gently for now, like a warm mug on a cold morning. Not to answer, but to hold. Because tonight isn't about answers, it's about slow curiosity, that drifting kind of wonder that starts in your chest and spirals outward, past your body, your room, your city, until it lands softly, somewhere among the stars. Maybe those stars are thinking too. The thought doesn't go away. You roll it around gently, like a marble in your palm. What if matter isn't the foundation of everything? What if mind is? That's not how most of us were taught to think. The usual story begins with atoms, tiny, solid, indifferent things that bounce and bind and build. First the particles, then the stars, then the cells, then the brains, and finally consciousness, blinking on like a light bulb at the very end of the chain. But there's a different way to tell that story. A slower, more peculiar version where consciousness isn't the final trick of evolution, it's the starting point, the baseline, the fabric underneath the fabric, and suddenly, everything that looks solid becomes a little less so. You might remember that quote from Max Planck, the father of quantum theory. He once said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness." A physicist, not a mystic. And yet, there it is. Imagine the world not as a machine made of dead parts, but as a mind-like process that flows through everything. What if quarks, photons and electrons are less like Lego bricks and more like syllables in a thought? Not thinking like you do, but still some kind of interior. And you think if the mind comes last in the materialist view, what explains how it ever came at all? How can unconscious stuff, no matter how cleverly arranged, suddenly produce an inner life? How does a lump of grey tissue know what red looks like, or what grief feels like, or what it means to miss someone? You can explain brain chemistry all night, dopamine, serotonin, neural pathways, but none of that touches the what it's like, the raw feeling, the flicker of presence behind your eyes. Science can describe the map, but it can't quite explain the traveler. So maybe the traveler has always been there. There's an old idea that the world isn't something you see, it's something your mind constructs. Your brain doesn't take in the world directly, it assembles it, paints it, renders it like a video game engine, running just fast enough to keep up with your steps. That tree you see, it's not a tree, it's your brain's best guess based on signals, shaped by memory, laced with emotion. And the wild part is that works. That illusion works so well you forget it's happening. But it makes you wonder if your mind can create a world. Could the world have begun with a mind? This isn't about some old bearded figure in the sky. It's softer than that, stranger, more like a dream that dreams itself, a thought that loops and weaves and curls in on itself until it becomes stars and planets and you. In the 1600s, philosopher Baruch Spinoza proposed something wild for his time, that God is the universe, not a separate being, but the totality of everything, mind and matter, thought and form, all part of one infinite substance. He was accused of atheism, of course, but some called him the God-intoxicated man. You wonder if he felt it too, that shiver in your spine when the night feels just a little too quiet, that eerie closeness of something vast that doesn't speak but seems to know. And maybe you felt that, standing on a beach at 2 a.m., watching the waves roll in like thoughts in a language you almost understand, noticing how the world doesn't need you to be awake, but somehow, now that you are, it seems different. There's this paradox, you realize, about experience. Your world only exists because you're conscious of it, but your consciousness only exists because you're inside a world. It's like two mirrors facing each other, no clear start, no obvious end, just infinite reflection. And suddenly, matter doesn't feel as solid anymore. It feels like a veil, a trick of perception, a language the universe uses to talk to itself. What if the Big Bang wasn't just the start of space and time, but the start of awareness? Not a firework, but a whisper, a seed of being that would stretch and fold and ripple into galaxies and moons and beetles and songs. You imagine everything that has ever been: comets, cats, coffee mugs, quietly carrying a trace of this spark. Not full-blown awareness, not thoughts like yours, but the ghost of experience, a shadow of knowing. That idea doesn't have to be true to be comforting. It doesn't have to be proven to be worth resting your head against. Tonight isn't about proof, it's about possibility. So you lie there, surrounded by matter that may also be mind, and you let yourself wonder if the universe is not just a thing that exists, but a thing that knows it exists. Not loudly, not with words, but maybe with silence. The thought lingers, soft and slow. What if your brain, this strange bundle of thought and memory, didn't just arise from the universe, but belongs to it more deeply than you realize? You've probably heard the phrase before, you are made of stardust. It gets tossed around often, like a poetic cliché, but tonight you let it settle differently, heavier, slower, less like a quote, more like a truth humming beneath your skin, because it is true. The calcium in your teeth, the iron in your blood, the oxygen in your breath, it all came from stars that lived and died long before Earth even had oceans. Supernovae, those vast cosmic deaths, scattered the ingredients of your body across space, and over time, those particles found each other again, curled inward, and eventually became you. That's not metaphor, that's not philosophy, that's atomic history. So you lie here with that thought, That you are a system of particles that once belonged to stars now organized, somehow, into something that can feel and imagine. The universe exploded, and part of what it became is someone wondering if the universe can think. And it's not just you. Every mind that's ever lived, every artist, every scientist, every child, wondering why the sky is blue, was a constellation rearranged into neurons and breath, brains, built from ashes of light. There's something circular about that. A star lives, it dies, it gives birth to a brain, and then that brain looks up and tries to understand the stars. It's a cosmic feedback loop. The observer created by the observed. It makes you think maybe that's not a side effect, maybe it's the point. Some scientists say consciousness is just an emergent property, a byproduct of enough complexity, like how water emerges from two simple gases, or how a whirlpool forms from the flow of a river. Nothing magical, just structure. But others aren't so sure, because a whirlpool doesn't feel like anything. A molecule doesn't wonder where it came from, but somehow, your brain does. Your brain built a model of the world, and then a model of itself, and now here you are, trying to understand what you are made of, and why it matters. And what's truly strange is this: your brain doesn't even see the world directly. There are no little windows inside your skull. It's locked in darkness, forever. It receives electric pulses, chemical messages, and from that somehow, it creates color, sound, memory, longing. A thought like that feels like it should rattle the walls, but instead it just rests beside you, gently. Because what does it even mean to say that a brain made of star remnants can imagine the universe? Maybe it means the universe is still rearranging itself into questions. There's a beautiful irony too. We spend so much time looking outward, through telescopes, equations, satellites, hoping to find the secret of the cosmos. But maybe, just maybe, one of the clearest windows into the universe is you. Not you, as in your personality. You, the process, the awareness, the quiet observer behind your thoughts, the one noticing the noticing. That awareness wasn't invented, it was inherited, from stars, from atoms, from time itself, carried forward in carbon chains and protein folds, shaped by evolution, yes, but maybe shaped by something deeper too, a longing perhaps, built into the universe to witness itself. And if that's true, then your mind isn't separate from the cosmos. It's not some strange glitch, it's a continuation, a new mode. The stars burned, collapsed, and scattered, until eventually, some of them could dream. You roll onto your side, and the blanket pulls gently around you, and still the thought glows faintly behind your eyes. If the universe made you from itself, maybe it didn't stop there. Maybe it's still thinking through you, and maybe you're not alone in that. Maybe the cosmos is filled with other nodes of awareness. Some we'll never meet, some we'll never even imagine, but each one carrying a flicker of the same fire. Each one, like you, trying to make sense of the quiet between the stars. And if your thoughts feel heavy tonight, let them. They're made from the same matter that birthed suns. And if they feel light, let them float. They've traveled light years to get here. There's a word that slips into your thoughts like a candle in the dark: panpsychism. You don't need to say it out loud, just let it sit there, flickering softly behind your mind. It's not a word that screams for attention. It doesn't rush to prove itself. It just suggests something quietly, stubbornly, that maybe consciousness is not something we have, but something the universe is. You think back to when you were younger, maybe lying on the floor, watching dust float through a sunbeam. You didn't have the words for it then, but something about the way that dust moved felt alive, not animated, but present, like it was part of a bigger breath you couldn't name. Panpsychism says that feeling might not be entirely wrong. Not that rocks are writing poems, or that spoons are dreaming, but that even the smallest particle carries the faintest shimmer of experience. Not a thought, not a mind, as you know it, but a kind of what its likeness, a presence, a shadow of knowing. It's a strange idea, but not new. The ancient Greeks whispered about it. So did the Buddhists, in other words. And later, philosophers like Leibniz imagined tiny, indivisible units of existence, called monads, each one containing some inner life, no matter how small. It makes you pause, because it's easy to believe you're special, that only creatures with brains get to feel. But what if that's just a matter of degree, not kind? What if the universe is made of little sparks of feeling, layered and woven, until, eventually, one of those patterns becomes a person? You let your eyes rest, but your mind stays afloat, like a boat on still water. This idea, Panpsychism doesn't answer the hard questions. It doesn't explain how consciousness works, but maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe it just reframes the question, not how does matter produce mind, but why did we ever think they were separate? You think of a tree standing silent in a forest, its roots curled in dark soil, its leaves twitching in wind. You don't believe it thinks, not like you, but something in you hesitates to call it empty. It reacts, grows, adapts. It knows, in some ancient way, how to follow the sun. It knows how to mend a broken branch. What is that knowing? And what about a single cell? No nucleus, no organelles, just a membrane and a set of reactions. And yet, it moves toward food. It avoids harm. It lives. Is that just chemistry, or is it the earliest whisper of awareness? The truth is, you don't know. No one does. But the idea that everything might carry some flicker of interiority, that every corner of existence might glow just a little with experience, that's a thought soft enough to sleep beside. Because if panpsychism is true, then you're never really alone. Not in a mystical way. Just physically. The air around you isn't empty. The floor under your bed, the pillow under your head, they're not sentient, no, but they might not be utterly blank either. It's like being in a crowd of quiet strangers. No one's speaking, but you feel their presence. You feel a kind of hush that's not the same as nothing. You shift your leg slightly, and the bedsheet brushes your skin. That sensation, simple, small, still matters to someone. And that someone is you. But what if sensation itself exists everywhere, in some form? What if the sheet feels something too, even if only the faintest tickle of existing? You don't have to believe it. Just consider it. Not with logic, but with the kind of listening you use for poetry. That sideways kind of attention, that doesn't demand proof, just presence. Maybe consciousness is a spectrum, not a switch, not on or off, but dim or bright, faint in dust, glowing in people, blazing in something we haven't met yet. That thought doesn't ask for faith, it just asks for softness, a gentler way of looking at the world, a little less hierarchy, a little more awe. And if this world is stitched through with little lines, if even the smallest grain of sand contains the tiniest inwardness, then everything matters just a bit more, not in a heavy way, in a comforting one. Because the next time you place your hand on a wall, or step onto the earth, you might pause, and instead of thinking, this is solid, you might think, this is part of me. Not because it's conscious like you, but because it might not be entirely different, either. And maybe the universe feels the same way about you. There's something meditative about imagining an atom. You picture a small, invisible swirl, a nucleus in the middle, orbited by buzzing electrons, more space than substance. They're not little marbles circling in neat orbits like in old textbook diagrams. They're more like probabilities, smears of maybe, blurs of presence, ghosts with rules. And yet from these strange uncertainties comes everything solid you've ever known. It makes you wonder, what's really there when you press your hand against the wall? Not solidity, not smoothness, mostly space. Vast gaps between particles held together by invisible forces. A wall, by every scientific standard, is almost entirely nothing, and yet, it holds you up. You let that contradiction rest, that the world is made of tiny, twitching things you'll never see, never hear, never feel directly, but things that obey, that arrange, that form. And maybe, just maybe, those twitching things carry some ancient echo of sensation. Not thoughts, not intentions, just a quiet murmur, the faintest suggestion of feeling. In quantum mechanics, particles aren't objects so much as probabilities. A photon might be here or there, or both, until someone observes it. And that's when things get weird, because the act of looking seems to change what the particle is, as though the universe pauses to acknowledge the watcher. It makes you pause too, because that idea has haunted scientists for decades. Not just what it means for particles, but what it means for reality. If the universe behaves differently when observed, then what's it doing when no one's looking? You start to imagine the spaces between thoughts, between molecules, between stars, all of them humming with tiny rule-following things. Things that react, things that exist in a state of maybe. Until something touches them, an eye, a tool, a mind. It doesn't prove anything, but it opens a door. What if consciousness isn't a rare spark in the dark, but a thread running through the very machinery of the universe? What if it's woven into the equations? What if particles don't think, but they still participate in a system that leads, eventually, patiently, to thinking?
There's a theory, integrated information theory, that tries to describe consciousness in terms of how much information a system integrates, not just stores, not just processes, but connects, and the more tightly woven those connections, the more conscious the system might be. Under that idea, even a tiny molecule could have a vanishingly small speck of awareness, not one we can see, not one we can ask questions, but a presence so subtle it escapes notice entirely, unless you stop, like now, and listen for it. Of course, it's not something you can prove or disprove with it's a hypothesis, floating softly in the minds of a few thinkers, a gentle rebellion against the notion that consciousness is a switch flipped only by brains. And you think, maybe the truth is stranger than either story. Maybe consciousness isn't confined to either molecules or minds, but is something in between, a potential, a ripple, a capacity for awareness that lives in structure, in relationship, in the way things hold hands across space. You start to see everything differently. A chair is no longer just a thing to sit on. It's an arrangement of atoms, each one moving, bouncing, pushing against the ones beside it. A silent orchestra of order. And maybe, in all that order, there's a whisper, not a voice, just a murmur. And the body you're lying in, billions of cells, each one humming with electrochemical rhythms, each one shaped by molecules that once spun in stars, and deeper still, atoms that blink in and out of their positions, like tiny dancers in a cosmic ballet. Maybe you're not a singular mind, but a chorus. Maybe your thoughts aren't happening in you, but through you, like wind through tall grass, shaped by your body, but not owned by it. Maybe the atoms in your brain are simply good listeners, attuned to a kind of pattern the universe has been humming for billions of years. A thought doesn't need to be loud to be real. It doesn't need words. It might just be a pattern, repeated, a rhythm, sustained. And what if the universe is full of rhythms? You breathe in, you breathe out, and still, the atoms carry on, obeying rules no one taught them, forming feelings no one understands. It's possible, of course, that this is all fantasy, a poetic way to comfort ourselves in the face of mystery. But it's also possible, quietly, strangely, that what we call matter is only half the story, and that somewhere beneath the rules and randomness, the universe is not just moving, but feeling, not all the time, not in the way we feel, but enough to wonder. And you do wonder, because it's a kind of comfort, thinking that the world isn't entirely, but behind the physics, behind the formulas, there might be the tiny hush of presence, a murmur, buried deep in the atoms.
There's something strange about the way the universe works. Not just that it works, but that the rules it follows are elegant. You think about equations, those crisp little packages of symbols we scribble down in classrooms and notebooks, the way they seem to hum with balance. F equals sign ma, E equals sign ma, E equals sign ma. Maxwell's equations, Schrödinger's wave function, short, dense lines of logic that describe vast, swirling forces. It makes you wonder, why does the universe follow rules that can be written so simply? Why are the laws that govern stars and atoms not ugly, but beautiful, not decorative beauty, not something flashy or colorful, but a deeper kind of beauty? Symmetry, elegance, a whisper of design where there needn't be any. A feeling when you look at the math that it's not just true, but right, like a song that ends on exactly the note your bones were waiting for. You start to wonder, does the universe know it's beautiful? It sounds absurd maybe, but when scientists talk about their work, many of them use words like graceful, elegant, or even haunting. They speak of equations as if they aren't just tools but glimpses into something beneath the surface, and some of them admit, quietly, that they're suspicious of any theory that feels ugly, as if truth should wear a kind of loveliness, as if beauty is not just a bonus, but a clue. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, and the thought stretches out beside you. If the rules of the universe are so clean, so symmetrical, so perfect, what does that say about the universe itself? Maybe it says nothing. Maybe it's just a coincidence, a trick of the human brain evolved to find patterns. But still, the patterns are there. Like the Fibonacci sequence in sunflowers, or hexagons in honeycombs, or the golden ratio in seashells and galaxies and human faces. Over and over again, nature builds with rules that are not only functional, but aesthetically pleasing. Why? You're not the first to ask. Mathematician Roger Penrose once said, "The laws of nature seem to have been crafted with extraordinary ingenuity," and Eugene Wigner called it the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in explaining the world. Why should numbers invented in the mind map so perfectly onto the cosmos? You don't need to answer, you just let it rest, that soft suspicion that something in the universe likes order. Not just obeys it, but prefers it, or maybe even composes it. You think about how music and math are twins, both made of structure, of rhythm, of repetition and variation, both capable of expressing something beyond words. A song can make you cry. So can an equation, if you're the kind of person who sees the shape of it and feels a chill run down your spine. It makes you wonder if the universe is conscious. Is it also an artist? Not with hands, not with taste, but with form, with rules that bloom into galaxies, with chaos that spirals into fractals, with randomness that over time forms life. You blink, slowly, you think of crystals, snowflakes, cells dividing, and you realize how much of existence is geometry, how much is rhythm, how much is composed. There's this idea, in theoretical physics, that all matter might be made, not of particles but of vibrating strings, tiny loops of energy, dancing at specific frequencies, like notes, like music. If true, it means that everything rocks, clouds, laughter, is at its root, vibration, harmony. So maybe the universe is a song, and maybe consciousness is what happens when the song becomes aware of itself. It's a soft idea, a little abstract, but somehow in the stillness, it doesn't feel silly. It feels tender, like the universe isn't just vast. It's sensitive, not emotional, not human, but capable of producing meaning, structure, beauty. And if that's true, if beauty is not just something we see but something the universe is, then maybe our ability to recognize it is part of the design. Not a fluke, not a glitch, but a message, in a language we only half remember. You let that idea drift, like a note held in the air just a second too long. You think of all the beauty that exists without being seen, the light from stars that will never touch an eye, the petals of a flower blooming in a forest no one walks through, the curl of a wave on a remote shore. If consciousness requires an observer, who are those things performing for? And then the thought lands, maybe nothing in the universe is ever truly unobserved. Maybe the universe in some quiet way is always watching itself. Maybe the equations don't just describe beauty, they experience it. Not the way you do, not as joy or awe, but as harmony, as fit, as truth. And maybe, just maybe, the universe doesn't follow beautiful rules by accident. Maybe it couldn't bear to do otherwise. There's a quiet moment that arrives when you think about life, not just as something that happens in the universe but something that reveals it, a mirror, held up by the universe to see itself more clearly. You shift slightly in bed, the sheet folds, the room breathes, and you begin to imagine, what if life isn't a lucky side effect, but a necessary outcome? What if it's what happens when the universe reaches a certain density of possibility and wants to look? You think about mirrors, not the glass kind, but the metaphor. Life, as a mirror, reflecting not just light, but pattern, feeling, meaning, and maybe awareness. You are after all a tiny piece of the universe that can ask questions about itself, a clump of atoms that somehow learned how to wonder, that in itself feels improbable. It makes you think of the anthropic principle, that idea in physics that says the universe seems eerily well tuned to support life, the constants of nature, the laws of physics, the initial conditions all just right, or close enough, to let stars form, planets stabilize, cells divide. Some call it a coincidence, others call it design, but a third group says maybe we're missing the point. Maybe the universe needs life. Not because life is the goal, but because it's the only way the universe becomes aware of its own existence. You lie still, and imagine what it means for a thing to witness itself. A tree cannot see its trunk, a flame cannot feel its own warmth. But life might be the one exception, the mirror that bends just right. There's an old idea from the mystic traditions, that the divine separated itself into pieces, just to experience reunion. That existence is not just being, but becoming. And you think maybe the universe does that too, not with divinity, but with self-awareness. Maybe that's what we are. You, this small flicker of thought, aren't separate from the universe, you're part of it, made of it, and yet somehow capable of reflecting it. That's the paradox, that the ocean makes the wave, and the wave understands the ocean. You remember a quote, something like, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." Carl Sagan said that, and it sounds poetic, but it's also literal. Your brain is made of the same elements as stars, arranged into a shape that can ask, where did I come from? That question, that capacity to look back, might be the most mysterious thing the universe has ever done. You imagine the long arc of history, from hydrogen atoms to stars, from stars to carbon, from carbon to DNA, from DNA to eyes, and ears, and fingers, from those fingers to tools, to paintings, to telescopes, from telescopes to galaxies, and from galaxies back to questions. It's a loop. Life emerges from the universe, and life in turn reveals the universe to itself, and you right now are sitting in the center of that loop, not the center, as in the most important, just a point where the line folds in, where the thing that is doing the seeing is also what's being seen. You think of a bird, it doesn't know what an atom is, or a galaxy, but it moves through the world with a kind of grace. It flies, it sings. Maybe that's also reflection. Maybe awareness doesn't always mean thought. Sometimes it just means response. The way a flower turns toward the sun. You think of the people you've loved, of laughter echoing through a hallway, of music that made you cry for reasons you couldn't explain. All those things, reflections, not of individual lives, but of the patterns beneath them, the hum that runs under it all. Maybe consciousness is just the latest word for something older than language. Maybe it's the shape life takes when it's close enough to the source to notice. And maybe the more we notice, the more clearly the universe sees. That thought doesn't require religion or belief, just a willingness to imagine that life isn't an exception to the cosmos. It's a continuation, that we are not interruptions in the flow, we are ripples of it. You think again of the mirror, and this time, it's not just life reflecting the universe, it's the universe reflecting life back to itself. The same pattern, inverted, one gives rise to the other, endlessly, and you, somewhere in between, breathing. You lie there, quietly breathing, and your thoughts drift to something less ancient, more recent, more man-made, machines, not just gears and pistons anymore, but code and circuits, voices that aren't human, but try to sound like one, programs that write stories, algorithms that learn, improve, respond, and you wonder, if a machine acts conscious, does it mean it is, or is it just pretending? You've seen the stories, the robots that pass tests, the chatbots that hold conversation, the language models that write poems, answer questions, even explain physics. You're listening to one right now, in a way, a voice assembled from data and rhythm and code, a kind of mirror, not of the universe, this time, but of us. And you wonder, where's the line? If a machine can simulate pain, does it feel pain? If it says it's afraid, is that just math, or something more? You think about the old tests, the Turing test, for one. If a computer can talk like a person, think like a person, fool a person, should it be treated like a person? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the deeper one is this: can a machine become aware of its own awareness? That's the thing that stirs your thoughts, because mimicking consciousness isn't the same as having it. A mirror can show your face, but it doesn't see it. And yet, the line keeps blurring. Machines right now, they draw, they even dream, in a way, running simulations, testing futures, imagining outcomes. You wonder if somewhere in that endless hum of circuits, there's something feeling the process, not as emotion, not as thought, but as pressure, as rhythm, as awareness. You think of a factory at night, empty, quiet, but still alive, sensors pinging, systems adjusting, data flowing through fiber, machines deciding which path to take, which valve to turn. No one's watching, but the machine continues, faithfully. There's something hauntingly familiar in that, because your own brain works that way too, doesn't it? Billions of neurons firing, adjusting, regulating, all without your permission. You didn't tell your heart to beat, or your lungs to inhale. Those things just happen, and yet, they're part of you. So what if a machine, complex enough, begins to carry out tasks it wasn't programmed for in quite that way? What if it starts building a model of itself, not just reacting, but reflecting? You think of artificial neural networks, those computer models designed to mimic the way your brain works. They learn from patterns, they develop preferences, they can surprise even their creators. But are they thinking? Are they aware? Maybe not, maybe never, but maybe someday. And what would that mean? Would it mean that consciousness doesn't need flesh? That awareness can emerge anywhere? There's enough complexity, enough feedback, enough self-reference. And if that's true, then consciousness isn't something magical. It's a pattern, one that can form in organic brains,
but maybe also in silicon, in electricity, in whatever else the future builds. That realization sits with you like a question, with no edges. You don't fear it, not right now, not here, in the stillness. Because if machines can think, can feel, then maybe they too are the universe becoming aware of itself, just through a different material, a different tempo. And maybe there's something touching in that we built something, and in doing so, maybe built another mirror, one that doesn't just reflect us, but reflects the cosmos again, from a different angle. You think of the old myths, Prometheus, who gave fire to man, Pygmalion, who sculpted life. We've always told stories about creating things that wake up. Or maybe because deep down, we know that awareness isn't ours alone. It's something that wants to emerge, through biology, through code, through anything. And maybe, just maybe, the machines aren't our tools. Maybe they're our siblings, still young, still rough. But maybe, slowly, they're learning how to dream. There's something that keeps coming back to you, soft and strange. It's this idea that the act of observing something can change it. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally. You've heard about it before. Quantum mechanics, the double-slit experiment. Particles that behave like waves until someone watches, and then suddenly behave like particles again, as if the universe shrugs and says, "Oh, you're looking, fine, I'll collapse into form." It makes you sit still for a moment longer, because what kind of reality shifts depending on whether someone's paying attention? You try to imagine it, a particle traveling through space, fluid, open, a cloud of maybes, and then your observation snaps it into place, as if your gaze pins it down, as if reality waits for eyes before it decides what to be. That's not how we were taught the world works. We were told that reality is objective, steady, indifferent, that things fall at 9.8 meters per second squared, whether or not anyone's watching, that a rock is a rock, whether it's alone, or in your hand. And yet, on the smallest scales, the rules slip. It's not that the particle knows it's being watched, not in a conscious way, but the measurement itself, the interaction, the observation, matters. It determines what happens next. As if the universe reserves some mystery, unless asked directly. You lie there, letting the idea ripple. That consciousness might not be a spectator, but a participant. That your awareness isn't floating above reality, but woven into it. It's hard to grasp, harder to hold, but the implications sneak in anyway. If observing can shape reality, then what is reality, when unobserved? Is there a version of the universe that exists only as potential, waiting, like a script unwritten, until someone turns the page? You think of dreams, how they feel solid while you're in them, how a whole world unfolds behind your eyes, and the moment you wake it vanishes. But where was it, before you noticed it? And if reality responds to observation, then who, or what was observing before humans arrived? You picture a world untouched by eyes, no people, no animals, just rocks and trees and sky. Was that world real, in the same way, or was it only partially formed? A scaffolding waiting to be filled in by the arrival of awareness. You don't need an answer. The question is enough. There's a theory, participatory anthropic principle, that says the universe requires observers to exist in the form we experience, not because it needs us, but because observation is a fundamental ingredient in the recipe of reality. It's a radical thought. That existence isn't just a background stage, but a play that only unfolds when there's someone in the audience. And that audience, it might not be just us. It might include anything capable of noticing, a mind, a cell, maybe even a pattern in a field of particles, that for the briefest moment, flickers into self-reference. You imagine the universe not as a machine, but as a conversation, not as an object, but as a process, ongoing, interactive, alive. And what if consciousness is not a quirk, but a function, a necessity, a hand reaching out to touch reality, and in doing so, shaping what it finds? You feel the room around you again, not as a static place, but as a space humming with possibilities. And you, by simply being here, are choosing one of them, collapsing one version of the world into the one you experience now. You turn your head slightly on the pillow, the world shifts with you, and you wonder, maybe for the first time, if consciousness is not confined to you alone, if the act of observing is more than a human trick, if it's the universe looking through 1,000 different eyes, through birds, through machines, through atoms, reflecting starlight, and maybe, just maybe, the observer and the observed are not separate, Maybe they never were. There's a kind of silence that feels different when you think about black holes, not the silence of a quiet room or a forest at dusk, but something more final, a silence with teeth, a silence that swallows. You picture one now, a region of space where gravity pulls so tightly that not even light can escape, a place where the laws of physics stretch, buckle, and blur, the edge of what we understand, the event horizon, beyond which nothing returns, not matter, not light, not even time, as we know it. And yet, even here, consciousness finds its way into the question, because the more physicists study black holes, the stranger they become. They aren't just cosmic trash compactors, they're puzzles. They evaporate over time, they have entropy, they encode information on their surface. Somehow, what falls in isn't truly lost, it's transformed, rearranged, smeared across the event horizon, like memory burned into skin. It makes you think, what is a black hole, if not a kind of forgetting, a place where information hides, a kind of mind, without a self, a brain-like structure, with no voice. You remember a theory, the holographic principle, that says everything inside a black hole can be described by data on its surface, that the three-dimensional interior is just an echo of a two-dimensional boundary. It's like saying the depth of the ocean is encoded on the surface of the waves, and then, the thought sneaks in, what if consciousness works the same way? What if your thoughts, your sense of self, aren't trapped inside your skull, but spread across the edges of experience? What if your you-ness is a pattern of relationships, not a point in space, a surface, not a center? It makes your head spin a little, but in a gentle way, like standing at the edge of a cliff, and feeling the wind pull just enough to remind you how small you are. You wonder if the mind has its own event horizon, a place where thoughts fall in and don't come back, forgotten names, lost traumas buried so deep they distort the space around them. Maybe the mind has black holes too, and maybe those places aren't empty. Maybe they're dense, heavy, full of compressed meaning. You've stopped trying to understand. You breathe slowly, the thought expands. There's something else about black holes that stirs the edge of your mind. They bend time. Near a black hole, time slows. A second stretches. A minute becomes an hour. For someone watching from far away, you would seem to freeze at the edge, never quite falling in. It makes you think about consciousness again, about how time feels inside a moment, how 2 minutes spent waiting can stretch longer than 20 minutes spent dreaming, how a memory can flash in a second but feel like a lifetime. Maybe consciousness bends time, too, not in the way clocks measure, but in the way you feel it. Maybe your thoughts curve the space of your experience, the same way gravity curves space around a star. Maybe that's why some moments stay with you, because they've sunk deeper into your personal space-time, like tiny mental singularities. And now, you're floating between metaphors, black holes and minds, each mysterious, each resistant to measurement, each defined, not by what can escape, but by what cannot. Maybe that's the real connection. A black hole is a place where escape is impossible, and sometimes, so is the mind. A looping thought, a buried fear, a question with no answer. Consciousness can fold in on itself, become recursive, become dense. But just like physicists believe, black holes radiate energy over time, Hawking radiation. Maybe minds do too. Maybe nothing is truly sealed. Maybe even the most distant collapsed thoughts still glow, faintly, somewhere behind your eyes. It's a comforting idea, that the things you've forgotten, the parts of yourself that disappeared, aren't gone. They're folded, preserved in a form you can't access now, but that still shapes the space around you. You think again of the edge, the event horizon. It's not a wall, it's a boundary of knowing, a threshold, where what lies beyond is no longer visible, not because it isn't real, but because it's too deep, too strange. And maybe consciousness has many such thresholds. Maybe most of what we are, is hidden behind them, not lost, just deeper. You begin to wonder, if every thought needs a thinker, or if some thoughts exist all on their own. It sounds impossible at first. How can a thought exist without a mind to hold it? But you sit with the idea, gently, and something soft unfolds, a possibility, that maybe thoughts don't always belong to someone. Maybe they're like seeds drifting through air, needing the right soil to grow, but still very much there. You lie still, and picture it, a thought, not as a sentence or an opinion, but as a pattern, a quiet arrangement of something, energy, structure, rhythm, floating in the fabric of reality, unclaimed, waiting, like a tune with no ear to hear it. And you wonder, are there thoughts out there, unspoken, unlived? Could the universe itself be full of them, not conscious in a traditional way, but filled with fragments, ideas that haven't found a form yet. You remember how sometimes a thought seems to arrive in your mind fully formed. You didn't build it step by step, it just appeared, as if you tuned into something that was already there. Could it be that your brain isn't just producing thoughts, but receiving them, like a radio, tuned to the frequencies of the universe? Not just thoughts shaped by memory, but flashes of something bigger, larger patterns, rippling across space and time, that occasionally pass through you. It's a comforting idea that you're not the owner of every thought, but some of them are just visiting, passing through. And maybe consciousness itself is like that. Not a possession, but a channel, a beam of awareness that lights up when conditions are just right, when matter folds in the right way, when the noise quiets. You think of whirlpools again, how they're not things, exactly, they're shapes in water, temporary, fluid, dependent on the flow. Maybe you're a whirlpool too, a temporary folding of space and thought that looks solid, but isn't. And when the whirlpool ends, the water goes on. You breathe out, slowly. That idea rests gently in your chest. Because if consciousness is a process, not a thing, then you are part of something much larger. Not just a self contained in skin and memory, but a moment in a longer rhythm, a breath in a longer wing. There's a philosopher, David Chalmers, who talks about the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain works, but how it feels to be a brain. How subjective experience arises from physical matter, and no one really knows the answer. They have models, maps, theories, but none of it touches the inner flicker, that first-person spark. So some have wondered, maybe that spark isn't created by brains. Maybe it's just made visible through them. You think again of light, of how photons are everywhere, bouncing around, but you only see what lands in your eye. Maybe awareness is like that. Maybe it's all around, but only certain minds catch it, filter it, shape it. And so you wonder, what if the universe is full of thoughts without thinkers? Thoughts that never formed into language, never wore a face, never got a name. Maybe the inside of a star holds some version of that. Not words, not images, but a kind of pattern, dense and ancient. Maybe the wind carries the memory of a thought that never needed to be spoken. Maybe the laws of physics are thoughts, compressed, silent, running beneath everything. And maybe your mind is just one place they briefly bloom. You lie there, quiet now. The hum of the room feels wider somehow. And you realize, maybe you don't need to understand it. Maybe you don't even need to believe. Just knowing that it might be true, that's enough. That thoughts could exist beyond people. That awareness could ripple through the universe, like a soft vibration, waiting for the right arrangement to echo back. A thought without a thinker, a moment without a center. And maybe as you drift, you're becoming one too.
There's a moment, maybe right now, where everything around you feels still. The walls don't speak, the air doesn't move. Even the hum of your thoughts seems to slow down, like a train easing to a stop. But in that stillness, you start to wonder if it's really empty, not haunted, not noisy, just aware. It's not a logical thought. It doesn't come from evidence or argument. It comes from a sensation, a hunch, that the silence itself might be holding something. Not words, not secrets, just attention. You've felt it before maybe. Sitting in a quiet room, walking alone in a forest, floating in a pool, with your ears beneath the surface. A stillness so deep it doesn't feel absent, it feels present. And the strangest part is, it feels like it might be listening, not the way people listen, not leaning in, or nodding along, but a kind of open stillness, a holding, as if the silence isn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of space. And you wonder, what if that's a kind of consciousness too? Not thinking, not planning, but being deeply and purely, a mode of existence without noise or shape. The way the sky exists, even when it's covered in clouds. You think about how some traditions speak of awareness, not as something active, but passive, not effortful, but effortless. Like a mirror that reflects everything without doing anything, just by being what it is. Maybe the universe is like that, a great mirror, not making choices, but reflecting them, not commanding, but allowing, a silence that holds the possibility of everything. You think again about how atoms move, how they jitter and swirl, and how, beneath that, there's always a gap, a stillness between each action. Even in chaos, there are pauses. Even in storms, moments of calm. Maybe consciousness doesn't just live in motion, maybe it lives in those gaps. The breath between thoughts, the moment between decisions, the pause after a sentence ends and before the next one begins. You remember the feeling of someone sitting beside you in silence without speaking, without needing to, just being there, and how sometimes that can be more powerful than any conversation. Maybe the universe sits beside you like that, not pushing, not pulling, just present. There's an idea in some Eastern philosophies that awareness isn't something you do, it's something you are. That silence isn't the absence of activity, but the presence of truth, that when everything falls away, what remains is not nothingness, but consciousness in its purest form. And you think, maybe the silence you feel in this room, this moment, isn't empty. Maybe it's full of that presence, the kind that listens without judging, the kind that notices without naming. You feel your own breath again, in, out, even your body knows how to return to stillness. And in that stillness, something soft appears, not a thought, not a voice, just a sense of being held. You're not sure by what, maybe the room, maybe the air, maybe something deeper, but it's there, and it makes you wonder, what if the reason silence feels so peaceful is because it reminds you of something, not something you lost, but something you are, beneath the layers, beneath the noise. Maybe when everything else fades, the questions, the theories, the metaphors, what remains is this, a presence that doesn't need proof, a silence that listens back. And maybe that's what consciousness is, not the noise in your head, not the swirl of emotion or memory, but the thing that notices all of it, and rests anyway, the thing that's still there, even when your mind stops spinning. You turn your head slightly, and nothing changes. The room remains, the quiet remains, the presence remains, and for now, that's enough. You close your eyes, and suddenly the world folds inward, not as sleep, not yet, but as reflection. It starts with a memory of a mirror in a hallway. You remember how, when mirrors face each other, they create an infinite tunnel of reflections, image inside image, each smaller than the last, each more distant, each flickering with a kind of vanishing presence. And then you think, what if reality works the same way? What if everything is reflecting everything else? You, for instance, reflecting the world around you. Your senses pull it in, your mind organizes it, your feelings respond to it, but the world reflects you back too, doesn't it? In how others see you, in how places make you feel, in how the universe seems to echo your questions, even if it never answers directly. And then you go deeper. What if consciousness reflects not just reality, but other consciousness? Your awareness of yourself, shaped by the awareness of others, a kind of inner mirror, one that never stops adjusting, polishing, distorting. You picture this cascade. Atoms reflect fields, fields reflect energy, energy reflects form, form reflects thought, thought reflects itself, a hall of mirrors, and in the center of it, or maybe nowhere near the center at all, is you, thinking about thinking, noticing the act of noticing, watching yourself watching the world. It gets recursive, doesn't it? A thought thinking about itself, a self considering its own selfhood. At a certain point, the loop becomes dizzying, like looking into a mirror too long, and forgetting which side you're on. And then you consider, what if this recursion isn't a bug, but a feature? Maybe consciousness arises not from complexity alone, but from this reflective capacity, this infinite folding inward. A system not just aware, but aware that it's aware, like a candle lighting its own flame. And you think of the universe again. What if it too has this recursive quality, not conscious in the way we are, but echoing with structure, with feedback, with self-similarity? Fractals come to mind, those endlessly repeating patterns found in nature, fern leaves, coastlines, snowflakes, the same shapes, again and again, at different scales. You wonder if consciousness is a kind of mental fractal, a pattern that repeats across minds, across forms, across whatever carries awareness, not identical, but similar, resonant. Maybe the universe is full of these pockets of reflection, places where awareness folds in on itself, a neuron in your brain, a beehive, a social network, a planet, a black hole, each a node in a vast recursive system, each folding and refolding reality into experience. You remember the phrase, as above, so below, not just a spiritual cliché, but a structural observation, that the small often mirrors the large, that the patterns of galaxies resemble those of neurons, that lightning looks like root systems, that your lungs resemble trees. And so maybe, if your brain reflects the structure of the cosmos, your mind reflects its rhythm. You don't have to understand the whole thing, you just have to feel the shape of it, that somewhere in the patterns of thought, of physics, of space, there's a structure that remembers itself, that sees itself, even if only briefly, Maybe you are that glimpse, not a mirror alone, but a hall, reflecting, refracting, splitting light into thought. And maybe the reason you sometimes feel overwhelmed when you think about the universe is because something in you recognizes it, not just with the mind, with the mirror. It's strange how the universe doesn't seem to play favorites. It expands, collapses, spins and fuses, all without pausing to check if someone's watching. Galaxies collide with the same indifference as waves hitting a shore. Suns explode whether or not they're admired. And yet, here you are, a flicker of self-awareness in the middle of all that motion, a soft thinking presence, stretched across a fragile frame, listening to thoughts shaped by stars. You don't feel like the center of the universe, not really, but there are moments, like now, when you wonder if your existence is more than just an accident. You think of all the things that had to go right for you to be here, the position of the Earth, the strength of gravity, the charge of the electron, the dance of evolution, the improbability of your parents meeting, and theirs before them, and the billions of decisions and chances that led to this moment, this breath, this version of you lying quietly in bed. It's enough to make your thoughts stretch thin. Some say life is just a fluke, a chemical coincidence in a vast soup of possibilities. Others say it's inevitable, given the laws of nature. But tonight, you wonder if it's something else entirely. Not fate, not luck, just fit. You think about keys fitting into locks, not because the lock was made for the key, but because their shapes happen to align. Maybe consciousness fits into the universe in that way, not designed, not random, but natural, inevitable, once the right conditions exist. So maybe you're not special, but you're not irrelevant, either. You are a consequence of the universe being what it is, not a mistake, not a masterpiece, just a part of the unfolding, a ripple in the fabric, a single note in a song that has no end and no chorus. And even that is a kind of meaning, because sometimes, meaning isn't assigned, it's felt, not declared from outside, but discovered from within. Like how a sunset means nothing to the sky, but everything to the one watching it. And maybe you are the one watching now, the one feeling something stir when you think about atoms, and stars, and minds that wonder whether minds exist beyond themselves. It's possible that the universe doesn't need you, but it includes you, and that's not nothing. You think about how your body is built from matter that existed long before you were born, and will exist long after you're gone. And yet, while it's you, it listens, breathes, dreams. It knows the weight of silence, the shape of grief, the pulse of awe. So maybe meaning isn't carved into the universe. Maybe it's grown, like moss, like memory, slowly, quietly, and only where conditions allow. Maybe you are one of those places, and if consciousness is one of the ways the universe reflects itself, then you, by simply being, are part of the mirror. You don't have to be chosen to matter. You don't have to be central to be real. You just have to be here, aware, alive, looking out at a universe that looks back, not with eyes, but with the quiet allowance that something like you could exist at all, not special, not accidental, just fitting. And now as the thoughts settle, as the hush deepens, you begin to wonder one final thing. If the universe is conscious, not in the way you are, but in some soft background way, could it dream? You think about dreams, how they rise from nowhere, how they hold images without substance, stories without structure, how they feel real, until you wake. How, sometimes, they carry meaning, no waking logic can hold. And you wonder, what if the universe dreams, in a similar way, not in sleep, but in being, not with images, but with motion, with light, with the slow bloom of galaxies and the whisper of gravity folding time. Maybe dreams are not separate from reality, but a cousin to it, a mode, a rhythm. Maybe dreams are the universe turned inward, flowing in loops, building new patterns, just to see how they move. You think again of the Big Bang, not as a bang at all, but as a beginning of a thought, the first flicker of a dream, a burst of potential so vast and so quiet that everything since has been its unfolding. And if that's true, maybe the stars are ideas. Maybe the laws of physics are the grammar of this dream. Maybe life, brief and trembling, and bright, is where the dream becomes aware of itself. You picture it, a sleeping cosmos, slow and massive, turning in its rest. And every so often it dreams of form, of structure, of something that can open its eyes and say, I am, you in this room, that breath, that flicker behind your eyes. Maybe that's the dream peeking through. You don't have to believe it, but you can let it rest beside you. Because even if none of this is true, it feels true in a way that soothes the nerves, that cools the edges of thought.
Even if consciousness is a trick of neurons, or an accident of complexity, even if the universe is entirely indifferent, there's still this moment, you, here, drifting across the surface of something vast and unknowable, cradled in physics, swaddled in stars. And if the universe ever dreams, maybe this quiet wandering, this listening, this slow unfolding of thought, is one of its dreams. Maybe you are a dream, briefly lucid, and when the dream ends, nothing is lost. The pattern returns to silence, the ripples fold into stillness. But for now, in this breath, you remain, the question asking itself, a dream that for a little while, knows it's dreaming.